And we have addressed basically each and every aspect of small island developing states and the challenges that are associated with the implementation of the Agenda 2030 and the SAMOA pathway. But not quite. There is a major challenge left, the most important one that confronts all of us, which is the implementation itself. And also, when we talk about implementation, we are also talking about the building our statistical capacities and reviewing our progress. And I have the honor today, this afternoon, to moderate this panel on this subject area on monitoring, reporting, and building statistical capacity. And that's the subject of this panel, which you may note is not accurately reflected in the program. So please look at the program, which should be building statistical capacities and reviewing progress. In New York, we negotiated the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And one key issue that we underscored was that the data is key for effective policy making and decision making, as well as for reviewing progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda calls for ensuring that data is of high quality, accessible, timely, reliable, and disaggregated. In fact, the 2014 SAMOA pathway also addressed the importance that data in statistics play in measuring and assessing progress on sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda also established the critical importance of keeping implementation under review. Goals alone are not enough. Periodic reviews at national, regional, and international levels are seen as an important tool to accelerate the realization of the SDGs. During the negotiations on the 2030 Agenda, we as small island developing states expressed our concerns about the limitations of our statistical capacities, as small states are capacity constrained and often our statistical systems are not robust enough to produce the necessary data to put into place effective policies and for reviewing progress on the SDGs and the SAMOA pathway. So this session will discuss ways to build statistical capacity and mobilize new technologies to support policy making and review progress towards the SDGs. It will place a special emphasis on how SIDS can best review progress towards the SDGs at home and at the United Nations. And this session will address 5 broad areas that relates to these aspects. Can the SIDS National Statistical Offices effectively keep track of progress towards the SDGs? What are the most critical gaps in their capacities and in existing data sets? Are there examples of initiatives that help bridge these gaps? Secondly, have SIDS identified ways and systems to regularly review their situation regarding the SDGs at national level? What is the main role of the existing institutions in this area? Third, are parliaments and supreme audit institutions engaged in this process? How can they contribute in this regard? Is civil society able to provide inputs? What are the key challenges? Fourth, as we are facing the second round of voluntary national reviews this coming July, we can ask, how much can SIDS engage in carrying out these VNRs? Did we learn any lessons from the first round of VNRs held last year? And how can we move on with that experience? 5, how can global and regional organizations better support countries in the monitoring, reviewing, and reporting of the implementation of the SDGs and the SAMOA pathway? And finally, Are there emerging issues that have not been adequately considered or addressed in the global sustainable development policy debate? Well, these are very critical questions in addressing the implementation process. And this afternoon, we are very much privileged to have a very competent panel of speakers on this topic. We have His Excellency Mr. Frederick Shawer, the President of the Economic and Social Council, and also the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Zimbabwe to the United Nations. His Excellency Mr. Haroldo Queiroz de Oliveira, the Minister General Auditor from Brazil. His Excellency Mr. Alicia Faturi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Samoa to the United Nations. Ms. Pamela Monroe Ellis, Auditor General of Jamaica. And Mr. Paul Larsen, the Special Advisor, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. I shall open the floor for each speaker to have a short presentation of 5 minutes, and thereafter we will open the floor for questions. May I give the floor to Ambassador Shawer, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I am delighted to take part in this session, which in its nature is about implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs as we call them, and grounding the follow-up and review of their implementation in evidence-based frameworks. Regularly reviewing progress in the course of implementing the 2030 Agenda is an indispensable way in which we can track achievements, make course corrections, and continuously learn from our actions. In this exercise, quality statistics and data are a critical tool in assessing the impact of policies. They also support effective decision-making and the crafting of informed policies. As such, weak institutional capacities in statistical data are a major obstacle to economic development and to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. As we are in the second year of implementing the SDGs, I appreciate this occasion to reflect on the challenges confronting the seeds in these areas. I'm looking forward to some tangible thoughts on how this can be addressed, which I also can take into consideration in the execution of my mandate as President of ECOSOC. I will address 3 points in this regard. The first is the imperative of improving national statistical capacities. The current situation regarding data and statistics is one of high contrast, as we have seen in the last few days. On the one hand, there has been an exponential growth of data from multiple sources as a result of advancement related to ICT. Yet, on the other hand, statistical capacity remains very weak in many countries. Especially in many developing countries, there still exists lack of adequate statistical data to assess national trends in the context of monitoring progress towards realization of development goals. In other countries, while statistical data does exist, there is the lack of capacity to use it to the extent possible. Hence, in terms of need, there is a need for capacity building in terms of both building the database as well as in its utilization. As such, the data revolution, mostly led by private sector, should be accompanied by a revolution in the statistical capacities of the public sector if we are to truly respond to the challenges of the 2030 agenda, particularly as we only have now 13 years left to fulfill this agenda. This is specifically the case in countries in special situations, such as the seeds. The 2030 agenda recognizes this and therefore emphasizes the importance for data to be of high quality, data to be timely, reliable, and disaggregated. Such data will enable governments in the seeds and elsewhere to establish baselines, develop effective policies, and continuously review progress, make policy adjustments, and assess what they have achieved and improve their future policy making. As president of ECOSOC, I believe that there should be a coordinated international initiative aimed at strengthening statistical capacities of member states at the national and sub-national levels, especially in developing countries. Very often, we don't address sub-national levels, provinces, counties, districts, even municipalities. We should encourage that they also look at the use of statistics in this regard. Without a coordinated effort to enhance and sustain statistical capacity in many developing countries, the follow-up and review of the agenda will be highly compromised. The implementation of the provisions of the Resolution 2006/06, which was adopted by both the Economic Council and the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and the General Assembly on strengthening statistical capacities of member states remains pertinent in addressing this effort, while taking inspiration from the over 230 indicators developed by the Interagency Expert Group on the 2030 Agenda. Governments also need to be able to develop the use of national indicators, which are responsive to their own specific realities, their own capacities, and concrete situations. The exercise may demand resources that go beyond the capacities of many countries, especially in the seeds. In addition to international cooperation, public institutions may consider working with other stakeholders, such as business and civil society, to help bolster their capacity to mobilize and use statistics and data at the national level. And I think we are encouraged in the interactions we've had in the last few days here that these areas of interest, civil society and others, are recognized and have been invited to participate. Just last month, the commitment to intensify cooperation in this area saw over 1,500 participants from all over the world coming together in the first ever UN Data Forum in South Africa. They adopted a global action plan for harnessing the power of data and the statistics for implementation of the 2030 Agenda. It is my hope, therefore, that the implementation of the action plan will positively impact on the capacity of the seeds and countries in similar situations to generate and use quality data in the context of follow-up and review. My second point, Mr. Moderator, is about the pivotal role of country-level reviews of progress in implementation. One way the 2030 Agenda differs from the MDGs is that it puts in place a sophisticated architecture for the follow-up and review. Member states saw a robust mechanism for follow-up and review as critical in accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, a point which you made in your introduction, Mr. Moderator. Continuously revealing progress enables governments to maintain an attitude of constant self-introspection. This allows them to continually improve their policies and maintain accountability to their people. The follow-up and review process envisioned in the 2030 Agenda is based on a three-tier system: the national, the regional, and the global. Nonetheless, follow-up and review at the national level is the actual bedrock for the success or successful implementation of the 2030 Agenda. It is also the basis for the reviewing of the agenda at the regional and global levels. For that reason, the 2030 Agenda encourages countries to conduct regular reviews of progress towards the SDGs at the national level and including all partners at the national level. These country-level reviews are to be conducted in a manner that best fits the national circumstances, be it through existing institutions or through new mechanisms. They should form part of what any government does to assess the development situation in the country and keep impact on its policies under review. During the last year's review, we had good examples of different models employed by governments in conducting their national reviews. The Agenda 2030 also recognizes the essential role of the national parliaments, of our national parliaments, and other institutions in the national review. And institutions like supreme audit institutions can also have a role in the context that we are discussing in this session. With us here today, as we have been told by the moderator, we have specialized people, the general auditors of Brazil and Jamaica, and I hope that they will further elaborate on some of these things. In our lives, generally, in my past life, I've known parliaments to be key to the implementation of the MDGs. And I want to believe that parliaments will continue to be key in the implementation of SDGs because they have this basic role of holding their government to account. And they hold government to account by wanting to know what they've implemented in their 5-year national development plan or whatever national development plan. So parliaments have a very specific role. My final point is about the importance of national voluntary reviews at the high-level political forum, so-called HLPF. The HLPF is the central platform for follow-up and review for the 2030 Agenda and all internationally agreed development goals at the global level. Indeed, the follow-up to the SAMOA pathway also forms an integral part of the HLPF. This gives us an opportunity for the seeds to take advantage of this platform to share individual national experiences in the implementation of the SAMOA pathway. It is also an opportunity to highlight the linkages between the two agendas. As such, I encourage the seeds to participate actively in the HLPF as well as in the voluntary reviews. The 2030 Agenda sets the framework for member states to present voluntary reviews at the HLPF. These voluntary reviews aim to track progress in implementing of the SDGs and global targets. They also aim to facilitate a sharing of experiences and lessons learned. It is hoped that they lead to strengthening policies and institutions and to launching of strategic partnerships. On this note, allow me, Mr. Moderator, to digress a little bit. In our discussions around the high number of countries that have volunteered for this year's review, there has been concern that this level of interest might taper off considerably in upcoming sessions. However, I believe that as volunteers register concrete benefits from the VNRs, such launching partnerships, for example, more countries will be encouraged. In fact, in deciding who comes to make reviews this year, my bureau and I have said that no one will be left behind. And we intended to make sure that everybody who shows some interest would be allowed and given an opportunity to present themselves. We didn't know what was in the offing, because what was in the offing was an inundation of requests of interest by the various member states to want to participate. Whereas last year, 2016, we had 22 member states coming forward for voluntary reviews. This year, we have had to put a lead when we reached the 44 countries. And we had to write and say, we are stopping on this particular number, and we circulated that number to member states so that all those who have written us after that circulation, we have said we recommend you for the review in 2018 because we could not cope with the interest. I was quite fascinated myself by the response, and I thought that if we move along with this enthusiasm, and considering we had 22 last year, we're 44 this year, maybe we're averaging 33 per year. And a very quick computation will tell you that 33 divided into 193 countries, it gives you just about 6. It's 5.8 something something. And these are the number of years that it will take for every member state to give its first review, to give its first review to the United Nations. And this way, in 12 years, and therefore before the end of the 2030 deadline, every country will have been enabled to give 2 reviews. And I think that would be a remarkable achievement indeed. Mr. Moderator, during the HLPF, I hope that we will be able to keep up with the enthusiasm and allocate member states sufficient time to do their reviews. To conclude, I very much look forward to the seeds to set an example on how country-level reviews of progress towards the SDGs and national voluntary reviews at the HLPF can work. I call on organizations who are here with us today to intensify their support and launch new partnerships to build the statistical capacities of the seeds. Mr. Moderator, I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shawa, who has a very important role to guide member countries as the President of the Economic and Social Council in this whole process. Because as we are all preparing for the next VNR coming up in summer, we would very much like the guidance that you have just given, and the aspects would be certainly key for member countries to take on board while we proceed on this important task of building the capacity. And you have touched upon very, very important 3 particular areas, which is the ones that we will be discussing when we open the floor. Now, I would like to call upon His Excellency Mr. Arnoldo Oliveira, the Minister, General Auditor from Brazil, a country, a key developing country, a large population, where you would have a lot of challenges in this matter, but certainly the insights will be very, very crucial for small island developing states. You have the floor, Minister.
Thank you very much. Distinguished moderator, distinguished fellow speakers, distinguished ambassadors and delegates of cities and other countries. Please allow me to express my gratitude to the United Nations and to Under Secretary Wu Hongbo for the honorable invitation to speak at this symposium and share our experience from TCU, the Federal Court of Accounts of Brazil. In the same way, I wish to thank the government and the people from the Bahamas for receiving us so well in this beautiful country. The good memories of your warm reception will stay forever in my heart. We all have seen how the last decade was marked by the extraordinary evolution of digital technologies with great impact on data production, collection, and analysis capabilities. For this reason, when I was assigned the presidency of our court 2 years ago, I adopted a basic guideline to intensify the use of information technology as a means to transform TCU into a mobile institution, easily accessible to citizens, and most important, a smart agents, more transparent, efficient, and effective in fighting corruption, frauds, and waste of public funds. To that end, we developed a strategy to increase the use of data analytics in our audit activities, supported by 3 pillars: creation of a central data department responsible for coordinating efforts, integrating databases, and developing advanced algorithms. A construction of a virtual platform to support the work of audit teams, facilitating access to information with the right tools, and empowerment of multidisciplinary audit teams in their whole organization with combined knowledge of government functions, statistical techniques, and computerized tools. As a result of this strategy, TCU is now fully capable to moving towards 100% digital control of public funds in Brazil at the federal level. The lessons we learned and the perspectives for future advance in this area have been gathered in the book Control of Public Administration and Digital Age, released in 2016 with Portuguese, English, and Spanish editions. It is our wish that the international community will be able to use this valuable input to improve the performance of supreme audit institutions and governments worldwide. As an example of our achievements, I highlight the predictive auditing algorithm for continuous monitoring of voluntary funds transfers from federal to state and local governments in Brazil. This tool helps identify risks of fraud in actions related to health, education, and other programs of great social importance. Thanks to initiatives like this, we are able to exercise control in a precise and timely manner at low costs, thus improving the efficiency, effectiveness of policies in our country. More than that, in the last 2 years, we also developed methods and actions related to evaluation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Be more specific, we conducted 142 audit engagements on policies related to the SDGs. So based in our experience, I am sure that effective oversight of the 2030 Agenda implementation will only be possible through the intensive and innovative use of data aggregation and analysis tools and techniques, the so-called big data analytics. Let me be more clear about this. If we do not immediately take the necessary steps to enable the digital monitoring of SDGs at national, regional, and global levels, we will assume the risk that the agenda will become a mere letter of intent without any practical consequences. I am aware that this can be a great challenge for most countries. Therefore, I wish to offer some ideas on how to overcome difficulties I foresee in this process. In my opinion, an ecosystem for monitoring the 2030 Agenda must be based on 3 pillars: cooperation, openness, and platforms. First, we need to recognize the importance of partnerships, not only between audit institutions and government agencies. The SDGs, with their breadth and relevance, stimulate interest of academics and companies from many different areas who can collaborate effectively for the implementation of actions and the evaluation of results. In this sense, I register the availability of Cezedelo Correia Institute, our corporate university, for cooperation initiatives with all countries interested in the knowledge we produce. I also place at your service our innovation lab, the first and only to be created by an audit institution, which was responsible for supporting several of the transformations that occurred at TCU in the last 2 years. As second pillar, I suggest the full adoption of government and open data principles and practices. As others already said, this is essential to increase transparency and reduce corruption, but is also important to foster innovation and collaborative solution of problems. The less resource a government has, the greater the need for such openness to facilitate co-sharing of responsibilities with the society in favor of economic and social development. As third point, I want to note that progress in the digital world is increasingly based on platforms which are open to collective construction much more than on finished products or services that may be provided by any single entity, whether public or private. Therefore, I believe that concepts such as government as a platform implemented by UK and another countries, or control as a platform proposed in our book will be central for developing better solutions to the demands of our citizens. In conclusion, I leave a provocation with many respect to the UN high-level political forum. We need to build a platform for predictive and continuous monitoring of the SDGs based on open standards and data so that governments, audit institutions, citizens, universities, and private companies from around the world can better collaborate for the success of the 2030 agenda. As a final reflection on the challenge discussed here for 3 days, please allow me to remind you the case of Estonia. Our countries don't have to be economic or technological superpowers to develop 100% digital government. All it takes is the will to search for the right partners, to discard bureaucracy, and to embrace the co-sharing of responsibilities with citizens, NGOs, and the private sector. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that very impressive strategy that you have, that you shared with us, which we have a lot of lessons to learn from by all SIDS. And the 3 pillars that you have identified are cooperation, openness, and platforms, which are very crucial. And it's a very collaborative strategy of all the stakeholders involved. And we wish you well, and we would like to learn more from this during our discussions. Next, I would like to hear from Samoa, a country which has submitted its voluntary national reviews in the first round last year. And we have here with us His Excellency Mr. Elisa Faturi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative. You have the floor.
Mr. Moderator, fellow panelists, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're at that hour of the day where the level of concentration is usually at its lowest. And I think sometimes the human brain also wants to take an afternoon nap. I don't know about being competent to speak about monitoring, reporting, and building statistical capacities. I take it as a prize for having one's country's name as the acronym for the outcome document of our 5th conference. So therefore, there's like a requirement to try and make some presence felt. The ambitious and comprehensive nature of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda motivated and challenged the political will for commitments of country at regional and global levels. Samoa saw the 2030 agenda as an opportunity to adapt and localize the SDGs to suit its context and peculiarities. The strategy for the development of Samoa for the 2020 period was launched in 2016 after the global SDGs, the 2030 agenda, and the Samoa pathway had already been adopted. The timing allowed us to align the intent of our national strategy with the SDGs and the Samoa pathway, both to harmonize definitions and concepts, as well as to advocate and raise awareness of the SDGs amongst all stakeholders at both community and national level. By localizing the SDGs through a consultative advocacy program, Samoa hoped that this would generate greater buy-in and support from the various stakeholders, an ingredient so necessary during the implementation and monitoring stages of the process. Towards this goal, Samoa's cabinet has endorsed the SDG task force headed by the Bureau of Statistics and the Ministry of Finance to review the progress of implementation of the SDGs annually through a sector-wide coordination platform. All reports are submitted to Cabinet and eventually to be considered and passed by Parliament. Now, lessons learned by Samoa from the MDGs were translated into action to help in its drive to implement the 2030 Agenda during the next 14 years. Now, one such lesson was the inadequacy of statistical information and the late involvement of the Bureau of Statistics when the MDGs action plans were developed. So much so that for the 2030 Agenda, our statisticians had an early and active role in the design of the SDG localization plan. Some innovative statistical capacity building activities were initiated, as well as strengthening and upgrading statistics infrastructures through the implementation of the Pacific region's 10-year Pacific Statistics Strategy. Samoa was able to produce the agreed core set of statistics across key sectors, including, but not restricted to, economics, population, civil registration, vital statistics, education, and health as required by Samoa's strategy for development, and agreed upon regional and international reporting frameworks with the timely analysis and dissemination of results to national users. As shared with you during my presentation on Tuesday, from Samoa's mapping exercise, we concluded that there was reasonable degree of alignment and compatibility of the SDGs and the Samoa pathway with our national strategy for development and its 14 sector plans. For instance, we were able to match 140 SDG indicators, 50 of which were derived from our National Statistics Bank, with 90 developed at sectorial level. The mapping of goals, indicators, and means of implementation helped to identify gaps and strengthen statistical capability. It was a result of collaboration among the Ministry of Finance and Planning and all sectorial lead ministries. Each SDD has been assigned a lead ministry to coordinate implementation, and each of the sectors has been allocated the relevant SDGs for implementation. Cross-sectorial considerations include gender issues, human rights, and climate change. The progress made through integrated planning framework is in addressing the measurements of the implementation of our strategy in relation to the 2030 Agenda and the Samoa pathway, and the framework for the Pacific regionalism gave us a boost of confidence and allowed us to volunteer to be amongst the first 22 countries that took part in the first National Voluntary Review during the UN High-Level Political Forum last July. Some lessons learned from our National Voluntary Review include the need for close collaboration cross-sectorially and amongst all stakeholders, which is essential for harmonization and disaggregation indicators and consistency of concepts used. Capacity building is also essential to develop quality data. The preparation of the report for Samoa National Voluntary Review generated increased public interest and awareness of the SDGs and has strengthened the national framework for coordinated monitoring. Underpinning all this is the need for strong leadership and political will for successful implementation. For instance, in Samoa's case, we were fortunate that our Prime Minister was an accountant by profession before he entered politics, so he appreciated the value of statistical data for evidence-based decisions. Additionally, he was Minister responsible for our Bureau of Statistics and was therefore very supportive of the needs of the Bureau to ensure that they were sufficiently staffed with an adequate budget to be able to carry out their responsibilities. At the regional level, mapping of the regional level is important to confirm priorities of the region. Samoa is a member of the Pacific Regional SDG Task Force. As we learned yesterday from the presentation by the representative of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat on the extensive work by the Pacific SDG Task Force, they are trying to integrate the 2030 Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Samoa Pathway, with our own region's framework for Pacific regionalism, so that the Pacific will have a streamlined set of indicators to facilitate easier and synchro reporting for the different agendas, a continuous challenge for our islands with small and sometimes under-resourced statistical offices. A comprehensive review of UN system support for SIDS by the Joint Inspection Unit put forward 2 recommendations on monitoring and reporting on the implementation of the SAMOA pathway, which has my government's full support. For instance, it recommends that the UN system organization should ensure that the specificity of SIDS is explicitly considered in defining the elements of monitoring and accountability frameworks to report on progress made on the SDGs, so that processes and indicators are adapted to their needs and priorities identified at the national and regional levels. Moreover, UN bodies should coordinate their efforts in designing monitoring and accountability frameworks and tools adapted to the capacity of SIDS to monitor and report on the implementation of the SAMOA pathway, the 2030 Agenda, and other sustainable development-related global mandates, while avoiding the burden of multiple reporting frameworks. Finally, a challenge to a UN-wide system. You want SIDS to faithfully report on their implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SAMOA pathway. Now, my request to you is, we also want you to design specific objectives or indicators to measure the achievements of your work and support to the specific group of SIDS. In closing, let me say that our level of comfort, at least at this stage, is that we now have a strategy for the development of SAMOA, which gives the Samoan government and its various stakeholders the confidence that they have a plan. They have the implementation arrangements, and through genuine and durable partnerships, they hope they can achieve and measure improvements in our people's quality of life. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kathuri, for sharing with us the experience that you have gone through in getting the first VNR submitted. And the way that you have done this is phenomenal in getting all the stakeholders involved, getting the local agencies, and working together with the government, businesses, private sector, and all. We have a lot of lessons to learn, all our SIDS countries, when we are preparing ourselves for the next round and beyond. Now I would like to pass on to another smaller and developing state, Jamaica, Ms. Pamela Monroe Ellis, the Auditor General of Jamaica. You have the floor, madam. You pass the other one. Please. Thank you.
Allow me to congratulate the organizers of this symposium for what I believe has been a successful meeting thus far, filled with rich discussions. Equally, I want to extend my appreciation to the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for being such attentive and wonderful host. I wear 2 hats today, one as the Auditor General of Jamaica, and the second as the Secretary General of the Caribbean Association of Supreme Audit Institutions. Therefore, my presentation will take a regional perspective as well as a local context. The Caribbean Association of Supreme Audit Institutions, I think, is reflective of the spirit of the Caribbean. One, but diverse. We are one in that we're all Supreme Audit institutions that get our mandate from the Constitution. We are diverse in the sense that that constitution provides different leverage as well as mandates for us to undertake our audits. Some supreme audit institutions have a broad mandate to undertake all types of audits, such as the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Jamaica. But there are others that are restricted with the type of audits that they can do. I wish to posit, however, that despite the difference in our mandates, that we all have a public interest responsibility to respond to the needs of the citizens as well as to Parliament. And in so doing, we ensure that we execute our mandate to foster that kind of development that is needed. Our public interest responsibility is supported by ISAI number 12, which is an international standard disseminated by the International Association of Supreme Audit Institutions. Now that standard has 12 principles, but for the purpose of this symposium, I'm going to share 3. Principle number 2, which requires that Supreme Audit Institutions undertake their audits to ensure that government and the public sector entities are held accountable for their stewardship over the use of public resources. Principle number 3, enabling those charged with public sector governance to discharge their responsibilities in responding to audit findings and recommendations and taking appropriate corrective action. And principle number 5, very important, which supports our responsibility for monitoring the implementation of the SDGs, is being responsive to changing environments and emerging risk. Now, over the past 2 days, we have shared the concern that access to public to finances and the availability of financing is an impediment to the successful achievement of these SDGs. And I posit that this reinforces the need for small island developing states to ensure that the limited resources that they have access to is spent in a manner that will garner maximum benefit. This underscores the need for robust governance structure. Now, the slide has to the right of it a wheel. Now, I know that is not so legible, but I want to go through, I want to speak a little to this wheel. The inner core of the wheel, and what this wheel really captures are all the elements of the governance process. The inner core, shaded in purple, is divided in 2. And what it articulates is the public officials' responsibility to ensure that they act in a manner that demonstrates respect for ethical conduct and law, as well as the need to have a robust stakeholder engagement. Now, segment C of that wheel importantly says, defining outcomes in terms of sustainable economic, social, and environmental benefits. The other segment says determining interventions necessary to optimize the achievement of the intended outcomes, developing the entity's capacity to include the capability of its leadership and the individuals within it, managing the risk and performance through robust internal controls, and implementing good practices in transparency reporting and audit to deliver effective accountability. I want to focus on C, defining outcomes in terms of sustainable economic and social environmental benefits. Over the past 2 days, I've heard the buzzword of the SDG bubble. And there has been reference as well to the governance, the need for good governance. Now, I want to suggest that it's not the SDGs and governance, but rather that the SDGs is a part of the governance process in terms of defining the outcome and monitoring to ensure the successful achievement of the goals. A SAI, a Supreme Audit Institution, is ensconced in that orange area with the responsibility for reporting. But while being a part of that wheel, the SAI also has a fundamental responsibility to ensure that it goes beyond on auditing the performance of entities related to the SDGs, but also ensure that the review extends to examining carefully all elements of the governance structure. In this regard, the conduct of financial statements and compliance audits are equally as important. Why is that? To achieve success, the SDGs have to be woven into the fabric of the policy direction of the small island development states, down to the granular level of procedures and systems. SIs then have to take an approach to monitoring that will ensure that the audit objectives are in congruence with the delivery of the SDGs. Auditing the SDGs require a holistic approach, which means the involvement of all the key players. On the international level, it requires the International Association of Supreme Audit Institutions to provide support to the SAIs. This was articulated at our Congress held in 2016, where the InterSci declared its overall goal to support SIs to make decisive contributions to the success of the 2030 agenda and thereby help to improve the lives of the citizens. At the regional level, the Caribbean Association of Supreme Audit Institutions recognizes its role in providing support to regional SIs to be institutionally strengthened to lead by example, stimulating beneficial change and adding value by contributing to improved public financial management and governance arrangements. To this end, CARA-SI's key strategic outcome is professional SIs delivering value and benefits by contributing to the SDGs and demonstrating relevance to the region. In so doing, we have identified 3 priority areas in support of this outcome. 1, high-quality audits creating regional impact. Through collaborative and parallel audits as an enabler for knowledge sharing and capacity building, specifically focused on ISAI implementation to garner uniform and consistent application of high-quality audit standards. The second is a strategic performance measurement and reporting for effectiveness. CARA-SI aims to facilitate SI PMF assessments for all its members and use this information to support capacity building and professionalization of the SIs in the region. And third, but quite important, is the effective stakeholder engagement to maintain relevance. The aim of stakeholder engagement is to garner greater audit impact by building trust and confidence among our stakeholders. Closer to home, SAI Jamaica's contribution to the 2030 agenda is nascent. However, though a structured framework does not yet exist in the organization, we have streamlined our audit focus to assess Jamaica's system to support the successful implementation of SDGs. And for those of you who were present at one of the breakout sessions, my colleague from Jamaica, Sharon Miller, shared the fact that Jamaica is developing a roadmap linking our national development plan to the sustainable development goals. And of course, this is very important for SAI Jamaica because it will enable us to link our audit successfully to the SDGs. Another approach taken by us is recently we developed and published a thematic approach to the development of audit plan for our audit plan for 2017-2019. The audit plan reflects 5 key themes, which are common issues identified over the last 5 years and areas that we consider fundamental to government achieving its policy objective, reducing waste and fighting acts of impropriety and corruption. The thematic audit plan declares our intent to assess the effectiveness of the government's plan to implement the 17 SDGs. Our audit plan also spans the issues of social, economic, and environmental nature. On the economic side, the Auditor General is required to review the economic performance of the Minister of Finance. The review is done in keeping with legislated fiscal targets and the criteria to be met. And this is a critical element of the mechanism to safeguard and engender fiscal prudence and responsibility. Recognizing that we must engage a multifaceted approach to achieve better audit outcomes, SAI Jamaica has pursued enhancing our stakeholder engagement. This approach is useful in directing limited resources to areas of greatest need, a critical element of auditing and the implementation of SDGs. To this end, the work of SAI Jamaica over the last 6 years was recently examined by our Jamaica Civil Society Coalition, and this resulted in a publication that highlighted the egregious findings over the past 5 years and encouraging the government, assessing what steps have been taken by the government and encouraging the government to continue to pursue the implementation of the recommendations. With all of this being done, we're still faced with challenges. So what are the challenges and the potential impediments to the SAIs in the Caribbean actually undertaking and successfully meeting its public interest responsibility? First is a lack of SAI independence. This is a major issue in the Caribbean, and I would think that it is a general feature in small island developing states. The lack of independence may not only impair objectivity and effectiveness of SAI, but it also renders a SAI immobile to respond timely to the evolving dynamics, thus running the risk of being unable to maintain its relevancy. For example, the need to conduct more performance audits will require the appropriate combination of skills. Some SAIs do not have control over the staff establishment, much less to determine the staff profile. This will pose a serious obstacle to conducting certain types of audits. Certainly, the availability of resources is a major factor. The restriction associated with this comes in many forms. One, insufficient competent human resources to undertake the kind of critical analysis required to produce meaningful, high-quality reports and recommendations. Two, the inability to procure the requisite competence owing to the lack of independence over human and financial resources. Three, the lack of sufficient financial resources to support the capacity building or to extend it to the wider staff membership. And four, the lack of financial resources prevents investment in technology that supports certain practices, such as data analytics. And that we heard quite a bit about earlier this morning. On the other hand, where a SAI has the resources, albeit limited, to review the SDGs, the lack of specific and measurable indicators will certainly be an impediment, since the audit is really an evidence-based assessment of what exists against established standards and indicators. Alas, with everything, there is still an opportunity. Broadly, agitating for SIDS compliance with the UN resolution A66209 in support of SAI independence is critical for the small island developing states, and particularly those in the Caribbean, to ensure that we can, one, maintain our objectivity and be supported in the form of the necessary institutional capacity building. Financial and technical support for CARASAI is critical to enable the effective coordination and monitoring of capacity building initiatives within the Supreme Audit institutions. Coordinating and seeking funding support for parallel audits as a means of fostering SAI implementation, promoting institutional strengthening and SAI transparency and accountability through SAI PMF review. And I am being mindful of my time restrictions, so I can expound on the SAI PMF review in the question and answer section. And raising awareness of the importance of SAIs to economic development and SDGs implementation by effective stakeholder engagement. And last but not least, engaging stakeholders in the furtherance of forging relationships and linkages to enable SAIs awareness and understanding of the key performance indicators and those that should be monitored for specific output versus those that are contributing to a process. In closing, I would like to say that Supreme Audit institutions are not naturally seen as participants in this process. I believe that the inclusion of 2 members from the Sahel community on this panel is a demonstration by the UN community of the relevance of supreme audit institutions. And I also would like to say that in keeping with the mantra that no one should be left behind, that this should be extended to the supreme audit institutions as well. Because a part of capacity building is knowledge sharing. And being aware of what is required is the first step in supreme audit institutions being effective with their new responsibility. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General from Jamaica, for that perspectives. I think that the last one that you mentioned about whether the Supreme Auditor institutions are not relevant or not fully engaged into this process, I think that is something that we will have to be taken up in the discussions about the relevance and how much they can be involved, or whether in other countries' perspectives. I think we'll leave it to the floor on that question. Next, I would like to pass the floor to Norway, Mr. Paul Larsen, the Special Advisor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It would be quite important to hear what a Western European country, well-established system in dealing with these SDG goals and the statistical competencies, and also a country that has already presented the Vietnam last year. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, thanks to the government of Bahamas for inviting me and everyone to your wonderful country, and to Dr. Wu and his team at UNDESA for inviting all of us to this wonderful conference. For me, and I would like to thank everyone here, excellencies and delegates, for making this very inspiring and a great basis for further partnership. The advantage, of course, to be last is that the time is running out, everyone's tired, and everything has been said about audits and statistics, which I, as a diplomat, know next to nothing about. So I can actually focus a bit on policies, which I know something about, since I was actually then coordinating what was, you remember the post-2015 process. It was called for a long time after Rio. In Norway. I was coordinating this since I came back from the World Food Programme after the Rio conference in 2012. I have 4 boring slides for you, but just to say that the first one, the 2-3 messages from that slide is, first of all, that our follow-up towards 2030 really has 2 strong legs, and that's both development assistance and the domestic policy side. And secondly, that it's so far a very, let's say, political and pragmatic rather than a technical approach. And thirdly, that the ocean is very important in our follow-up, which I'll get back to later. This move from the MDGs to the SDGs was really a very major policy shift. And we were concerned, colleagues who dealt with poverty alleviation and development assistance were concerned that the new focus on planet and environment would distract from the traditional focus on poverty fighting. We believe that we found a good balance in New York and that the outcome was very successful, but there was a risk there. And then there was a second risk. I mean, one thing was to integrate all the new goals, the good governance, climate change, oceans and forests, into development policy. The other was to integrate this new agenda into domestic policy. And I mentioned it at one of the roundtables the other day, that there was a risk that countries would say, okay, now we are all on our own, we have to just deal with it domestically, both developed and developing countries, and the whole concept of solidarity and partnership, doing it together, would be less important because now we have domestic resource mobilization, we have good governance. Again, I think we found a good balance in the Addis declaration. We're working with Guyana on this and others as co-facilitators, and there is a very fine balance there, which is very important for us. Now, how did we integrate the goals and agenda into domestic policy? Well, it was not so easy. Finance Ministry was not so keen. This would be costly, require a lot of work. It was really a UN process that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should deal with. That's how it started. So what did we do? Well, the first thing was that we closed down the inter-ministerial contact group that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had been chairing for 2 or 3 years during the negotiation process, where we were developing our priorities and positions for negotiations, poverty, health, education, and all, gender, the new goals, climate and oceans, because the Foreign Ministry did not want to get stuck with coordinating domestic follow-up. It was really not our mandate. We didn't have the capacity or the knowledge to do so. So we had to pass it over to someone else, and the closest in that regard was the Ministry of Finance. But as I said, they were not so enthusiastic for many good reasons, I'm sure. So the second thing we did was, like SAMOA, we jumped at the opportunity of the invitation of the ECOSOC president to volunteer to be among the first countries to give a national review. Of course, one advantage of that was that we did not have to deal with indicators and statistics, because they were not advanced enough, so we could have a very political and policy-oriented report, which of course I in the Foreign Affairs Ministry had to coordinate. But we got on board our environmental colleagues, very enthusiastic, and the finance in the tripartite co-leadership, less enthusiastic, but with the provision that we would be in the main lead. And what we did was to allocate allocate each of the 17 SDG to a coordinating ministry. So that, for example, environment might have 4 goals, others have 1 goal each, defense had none, and we, Foreign Affairs, had number 17 on partnerships. And then each of these ministries were responsible for collecting inputs into the national review report to the high-level political forum. And that was the first step towards the third element, which was to mainstream the follow-up and the monitoring and the reporting to Parliament directly into the budget process, which the Finance Ministry is responsible for. So it was kind of automatic that they became responsible for the coordination of the domestic side. That means that we did not set up any new structures, which other countries have done and which civil society wanted us to do, but we resisted. We said, no, we go straight into the budget documents, the budget process. So each ministry who is responsible for a goal writes about this in the text of their annual budget submissions, and the Ministry of Finance takes a coordinating role and summarizes in the national long-term budget. That is how we have done it. That's how it's working now. This last budget had all ministries write about their follow-up. As Tuvalu, I think, said yesterday at one of the roundtables, the Prime Minister's lead was really crucial in this regard. She is, Prime Minister Solberg is also the co-chair of the Secretary General's SDG advocacy group. And she was very clear that Norway must remain a good citizen and a good example, both on development assistance and also to do the homework on the domestic policy front. So we spent some time identifying challenges to implementation at home. You will be able to read it from our report, which is on the UNDESA website. The first round, the ministries were not so keen to come up with too many challenges. Everyone said, no, we have things in order here. There's no big problems. So I went through with some colleagues everything. I said, well, are you sure? He went back to is this not the problem here? Is this? Okay, well, it is a problem, yes. So we came up with a good list of challenges, also domestically, which I think is important. We cannot come and pretend that we don't have challenges as well. For us, it was very important that the Prime Minister also personally went to the high-level political forum to present the national review. we felt it was helpful for the Secretary General to drive also follow-up through the UN system, which is very important for us to support Secretary General Guterres, Amina Mohammed, and Dr. Wu and his team and others in the UN development system to take forward, because we are obviously one of the major donors to the development system and want this to be a very important channel for implementation of the SDGs, and through which we will also want to partner with the SIDS and other countries on the SAMOA and SDG implementation. Finally, just a few words on the most important area of implementation for all of us, I think, which is the oceans. We are all big ocean states. Oceans and climate change hang closely together, and we really need to help each other. I said at the panel the other day, Norway need help too. People were laughing a bit, but we actually are in this boat all together. And first of all, on climate change, we need to work together to realize the fulfillment on the climate finance commitments. For Norway, the Green Climate Fund is the most important multilateral mechanism. We have committed nearly $200 million for the next 4 years, which may be doubled if the fund secures verified emissions reduction from the RED Plus concept. And we work also with SAMOA and others in the steering committee to simplify procedures so that SIDS are able to apply for projects from support from the fund. We are very happy to see Fiji take the lead on COP23, and I'm happy to announce that Norway will provide support through the UNFCCC of $1 million to the Secretariat, so that also this will help the chair and countries who want to travel to conferences. I also want to announce, as I mentioned to Ambassador of Maldives the other day, a contribution. Last week we decided to allocate $1 million to the AOSIS Secretariat and Chairmanship of the Maldives for the next few years, so that you can continue also travel support included for Cancun conference, etc. Secondly, on the oceans, we must work together to promote responsible fisheries, prevent illegal fisheries, and protect oceans against pollution and plastics. These are 3 of the key action areas in an upcoming white paper to Parliament, which will come in March. So you are the first one to hear about it externally. And it's focused on how we, in our foreign policy, can support SDG 14 and oceans implementation. And we want to give kudos to the SIDS countries for ensuring that SDG 14 was part of the package, because it was not clear, it was not a given, and also for the drive towards the conference in UN in June on SDG 14, very important conference for us. I already shared with some of you and mentioned at the roundtable that we can also provide support on illegal fishing, satellite imagery. Just contact us and we'll be able to give some support. And finally, we must work together on renewable energy, which is so crucial for the climate change and ocean acidification agendas. I'm pleased to announce again, third thing, that we last week decided to provide $4 million for the next 3 years to allow the Clinton Foundation to continue its good work with Jamaica and others, SIDS, to replace fossil fuel with renewable energy and increase energy efficiency. This is complementary to the work that we are doing with the IRENA on the SIDS Lighthouse projects and other areas of scaling up renewable energy in LDCs and the SIDS. These are some of the most important areas. Just wanted to use the opportunity to mention this, and also to invite and hope everyone will come to the Oslo conference, or the first port state control conference in May on illegal fishing. It's FAO co-organizing with us, and there's also travel support available for that. So hopefully we'll see some of you in Oslo in May. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen, for giving us very, very happy news. Because when it comes to financial resources, I think that's where the crux of the implementation process for the SDGs for SIDS is concerned. It's always the case. I think that's a lot of encouragement for SIDS, those initiatives Norway has taken. Now, I'd like to ask the organizers whether we have any few minutes. We have few minutes, okay. I know the session is already over time, but then we will allow 20 minutes for question and answers. Okay, the floor is open here. I see Indonesia, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to, my name is Bluser Rajaguguk. I'm from Indonesian SIE. First, I would like to thank the government of Bahamas, UNDESA, and all speakers and delegates for already sharing the knowledge and experience in this excellent symposium. From my perspective as an auditor, I would like to give some comments and suggestions, if I may, at least about 3 points. First, some speakers and delegates said that the government will change in 4 or 5 years. So, to keep the SDGs policies going well, every nation, I think, needs an independent institution. That's why the role of SIEs of each nation is important to guide and monitoring and evaluating the progress of SDGs. Second, the 17 goals, which have 169 targets and 230 indicators, I think need to be evaluated and simplified. Why? Because auditors will assess and examine based on the criteria, and the progress of SDGs will be assessed and examined by those targets and indicators. That's why the important to simplify the criteria, which contains a balance of 3 dimensions, not a silo dimensions, will be a big challenge for United Nations and all of us to revise. Of course, I think it needs some innovation and creativity. And third, if we go together, I think we will have a better result. With that assumption, our SI try to adjust our audit planning program with the priority which already stated from the high political level forum. So from the preparedness stage, implementation, until monitoring and evaluating phase. So in TOSAI, and some SI, including us, now actively involved to make the audit guidelines for the preparedness of SDGs and also the audit guidelines for the SDGs implementation. As a conclusion, my closing statement, I must to say that SDGs is a humanitarian, and a very noble policy. So I think it's the success of SDGs now are already in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. We will take a few from the floor. Yes, please.
The importance of data and audit functions are recognized by the Government of Canada. We actually have a big statistics program going on right now with the CARICOM Caribbean. Statistics Canada has partnered with all the statistics organizations across the CARICOM Caribbean, and I'm actually going to be going to a meeting of that project steering committee on Monday when I get back to Canada. So if there's anybody who has specific issues within their statistics department, I can carry that with me back to Canada. In addition, we do work around audit, and in Cuba, we have an audit project right now with our Auditor General's organization. So we have a number of capacity building possibilities, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Canada. Any others? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Ebba Dolman. Can you hear? I'm Ebba Dolman from the OECD. There's a green light, but you can't hear. Okay, I'm Ebba Dolman from the OECD, and I've already had the chance to speak on policy coherence at one of the panels on the first day. But I did want to mention that the OECD also work on two areas that I think are of particular interest to the SIDS, and one of them is on statistical capacity building for developing countries through our Paris 21. And the second area is on financing to countries most in need, including SIDS, which is led by my colleague, Piera Tortora, who's sitting right behind me. And I just wanted to mention that we've, in this area of work, we have produced a report jointly with the World Bank on climate and disaster resilience financing in small island developing states. And this report examines the increasing incidence and impacts of climate-related events and disasters in SIDS, and documents the positive steps also that SIDS are taking to mainstream climate and disaster risk considerations into their national strategies and plans. A second study that is underway is to explore innovative ways to use concessional finance more catalytically. And a third area of work is also jointly with the UN, World Bank, and others, is on the issue of graduation from concessional finance, which many of you pointed out during this symposium. So we stand ready to support the process and the SIDS in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very, very useful inputs, especially when we know the ODA for the statistical capacities fell in 2014 by almost half in real terms. So those kind of engagement with the SIDS is very, very important. Any other from the floor? Well, if there are none, I would like to give the floor to the panelists to reflect on some of these questions. Mr. Minister, would you like to start? Ambassador Shawa?
No, it's not necessary.
Right. I don't believe it was a question. It was the opinion posited by Indonesia. So my only comment is that I support fully what the intervention by Indonesia, and to suggest as well, which is an approach that has to be taken by the SAI community, is that we identify the key indicators, those that are critical, that will result in tangible outputs, and making the distinction between those that are part of achieving the key tangible outputs. And I agree that it is quite difficult to monitor 241. Well, the amount of indicators seem to shift. I've heard different numbers being exposed, but irrespective of what it is, there is a large number of indicators to monitor. And as I indicated, and that view was shared, is that an audit is really an evidence-based assessment of what exists versus the standards that are established. So if the indicators themselves are not specific and measurable, that presents a challenge to the auditors to actually effectively assess those. We have to break it down into simple portions, knowing exactly what is critical to the outcome, which indicators are critical to the outcome, and to devise a mechanism to ensure that those are indeed monitored on a regular basis versus those that are just really a part of the process to achieve a tangible output. Thanks.
Noah, please.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to make a final comment that on partnerships, I mean, we are already great partners with Indonesia, Guyana, and others on the RED+, but the momentum that we have now on oceans and climate change is a huge opportunity, in my opinion, that we can build and elevate the concerns and the common interests that we have as big ocean states between small island states in the north and the south, and to build partnerships, new partnerships. And we look forward to working with you, with your regional groupings, CARICOM, Pacific Island Forum, and others, and the UN through the UN system, people who've been here on this panel earlier, to build on this momentum and build further partnerships. Thank you.
Let me throw a couple of questions to the to the floor from the various discussions and from the panelists. Two particular questions now. One which was also raised by Mr. Larsen during a presentation about how the foreign ministry interacts with the respective other line ministries, and the challenge that we all go through, which is very much in our own countries, in terms of getting them on board in the whole process. That's always a challenge. Maybe some countries can share to see how the coordination mechanism works. That's one area. The other, which has also been highlighted by many in their presentations, about engaging the parliaments, whether there has been any debates coming out so far. Maybe it's a little too early that the parliaments have not really started the process. It would be nice to hear from some countries whether the challenges that you face on those two particular points. The floor is now open again. If Ambassador Faturi, you want to say something before?
My observation is that I think the point has, or at least the argument has been made sufficiently clear in terms of the need to have good quality data. But more importantly, we have always been saying that the challenge is finding resources. My takeaway from here is that there's a lot of goodwill out there waiting to be tapped. And we just heard it a few minutes ago from Norway, from OECD, from Canada, and I'm sure even from the private sector for that matter. So there are opportunities, but it's really up to us to try and get that assistance. I always say that if you need something bad enough, by hook or by crook, you'll find a way to get it. So therefore, let's not make it too big an issue. Sometimes we are looking at multi-million-dollar activities when at the end of the day, even simple things like what Papua New Guinea shared with us and some of the youth shared this afternoon, they can have impactful, they can have the greatest impact in the people's lives. But too often we're playing with words simply because everybody talks about transformational. What on earth does it mean? Everybody talks about paradigm shift. What does it mean? It means different people different things to different people. So that will be my challenge in terms of the involvement of foreign affairs and the public service. They weren't called public servants for nothing. They are servants of the public, but too often they want to be masters of the public. So let's remind them that they are there for a purpose. And I come back to my point. What you need is political leadership. In the case of Samoa, we were able to be one of those countries who were part of the last year's High Political Forum simply because it was the Prime Minister himself. He saw the merit in us, even as inadequate as we were, but we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. And the instructions went out to the civil, to all the, to the whole public service. We want to be amongst those to present. Let's make it happen. I think that's what we need. But and I think in terms of parliaments, of course, I think they will need to be involved. Why? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who they will have to approve if there are budgetary provisions that are required, for the implementation of some of this. I think we need their involvement, and I think because now even people in the in the villages are aware of what the SDGs are, they would also want to be seen, to be in tune with what's happening. What I forgot to mention, which colleague from Norway referred to, I think for us in this exercise, there was no need to create new institutions. I think we utilize existing institutions. And also when we first heard about the SDGs, we selected 17 countries from 17 schools from around the country, and each school was given the task to focus on one SDG. Tell it to the government and to the people what SDG 1 means to you as a student. And then everybody, this was a joint exercise with the UNDP. And I think that was trying to take the message to the village, the school, and to the community level. I think too often we make it very difficult for ourselves. And I think, I know that foreign affairs, I think our foreign affairs played a very critical role in trying to coordinate it, because at the end of the day, they are the official point of contact with our development partners, and they are also the ones who will be able to present and advocate for some of these needs. But I just want to leave on a positive note that there is a lot of goodwill there, but it is really up to us to tap that goodwill. And I always think of the SDGs or the 2030 agenda or the SAMOA pathway. It's like a GPS. In New York, it's quite an effort to drive. But if you turn the GPS to your final destination, you know where you want to go. But sometimes you can either take the fastest route or the quickest route, or the fastest, or I think the shortest route. But sometimes, you're likely to go astray. Sometimes, you'll miss a turn. But the GPS will always try and guide you back to your final destination, irrespective of where you may go astray. It will. So I think I look at the SDGs in that respect. They are there as guidelines to try and guide us to the final destination, which is the alleviation of poverty and to improve the quality of life for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Fatori. Ambassador Shaba, you would like to say?
Thank you very much. I just want to underscore the obvious and urge member states, especially SEEDS member states, to take advantage of the willingness of some developed member states like Canada, who are willing to assist in building capacity in various forms. I think this is a very good offer for SEEDS member states to look at and to explore what possibilities they can pursue with Canada. Similarly, with the OECD, I think it's a very broad offer, which also need to be pursued. Certainly, like we said at various times, the statistical support is critical in the way we proceed in the implementation of SDGs in our countries, because our institutions for statistics, our national statistical institutions are not strong enough. So let's take advantage of these offers and develop partnerships with those who have offered. I just want to also say very briefly that the role of parliaments is an obvious role in the implementation of SDGs. It comes from their being part of government in the three-tier system. and their role is to hold the governments to account. And they hold governments to account because they examine and query what government is doing with respect to the implementation of its whatever national development plan. Could be 5-year or whatever length. So they would want to know how much government is done in implementing the SDGs. It is clear that in weaker states, you'll find this turf war between the various ministries, not wanting to give in to the Ministry of Planning or to the Ministry of, or some identified agency to take control. I think that parliaments can assist in this direction, especially when government consults parliaments. In my national capacity, we have put the SDGs in 4 categories, or in 4. We've collapsed them into 4 groups and assigned ministries to each of these groups for purpose of implementation. But you'll find that portfolio committees who follow up what ministries are doing can actually be very effective committees in terms of consulting government, questioning government about the implementation of the SDGs. And of course, at the national level, it's important to say that your partners are not just government, they're not just business. It's also business, it's civil society, and it's parliamentarians. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ambassador Shawa, and for highlighting those importance of the Parliament. Excellencies, colleagues, now since we are on time, we will be now closing this particular session. But one thing which has been throughout in the panelists as well as the from the floor has been about how we should be engaging all the institutions, how we should be having full cooperation within the stakeholders in trying to get the institutional mechanism more strengthened. This is actually the takeaway that I take from this particular session, because we, our countries, especially with the capacity constraints that we go through, are in a situation where we need a lot of coordination between various stakeholders, the government, the private sector, the business, as well as the most prominently the Auditor General has highlighted how the audit firms and the audit agencies has to be engaged on this process. Then the other trend that was throughout in the discussions was to make it more open and accountable throughout the process. Then finally, looking at the how we should be working together as in a collaborative fashion, making linking up all the agencies in terms of networking and creating more partnerships within the respective agencies. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for the all the impressive presentations, and let's give a round of applause for the panel. Thank you. From the organizers, I was told that we will have a coffee break until 4:45, when the next session will start. Thank you.